Family Guy. Today I'm watching one random episode from each season of Family Guy to see how the show evolved or devolved over the years. I've heard a lot about the show, how it's declined in quality and had a downfall almost as big as The Simpsons. I've also heard some people say that the show's still good and massively overhated. So to find out, let's start at the beginning.
I'd like to solve the puzzle. Go tuck yourself in.
You got it.
Well, you were close, Dad.
Man, I still can't believe we missed the phrase, my hairy aunt.
For season 1, I chose episode 5, A Hero Sits Next Door. The episode is about Peter preparing for a baseball game at work. I didn't know jobs had baseball teams, but considering this also happened in a Simpsons episode, I'm gonna guess that factory workers had baseball teams in the 90s. Meanwhile, new neighbors moved in that store named Joe, Bonnie, and Kevin. Joe is a former cop who's pretty strong, so Peter asked him to join the team. As it turns out,
Holy crap, he's a crapple!
surprisingly though, Joe does really well and even wins a game. This causes Peter to be jealous of him as he's immediately more popular, so Peter decides to gain popularity, he must foil a bank robbery. This goes just as well as you expect, and Joe ends up being the one to save the day. Peter's family tells him that he's already a hero to them and doesn't need to prove anything, and the episode ends. Even though I saw this episode a year ago, it was still incredibly funny. You can tell that everyone working on this had a ton of fun, and the timing is perfect. The feud with Peter and Joe kind of reminds me of the feud with Homer Flanders or Hank and Con. Unlike those shows, their feud only lasts one episode, which I respect a lot. Every joke in this episode is completely unexpected, always taking the punchline 5 steps further than you thought it would. For example, there's a cutaway where the opposing baseball team looks at Peter's team with magic glasses to see them naked, which is pretty random and seemingly pointless, but then 5 seconds later they pay off that joke perfectly.
You have impeccable credentials. I'm sure I can find a position for you somewhere.
And then of course there's those jokes that are so stupid and random that you can't help but laugh.
Last week, someone lost an eye at bingo.
I 17. Oh, darn it.
My favorite scene of the episode is definitely the cutaway of how Joe became paralyzed by having a fist fight with the Grinch. Not only is the fight surprisingly well choreographed, but this line at the end is genius.
You think you have won, you think all is well, but kiss my green ass, I shall see you in hell.
This episode does a lot with only 20 minutes, starting with a baseball match and ending with a bank robbery, and I'll give it a 9.5 out of 10. One of the best cartoon episodes I've seen in a while. For season 2, I chose episode 12, 15 Minutes of Shame. The episode starts with Meg having a sleepover and her family embarrassing her. She decides to get back at them by tricking them onto a reality show kinda like Jerry Springer. A producer watching the show thinks they're funny and invites them onto a reality show where they'll be filmed 24/7. Everything goes well until Meg quits the show, so they replace her with an actor. The camera crew gives more focus to the new actor than the rest of the family, so they quit the show, and soon enough the entire family are replaced by famous actors.
I do not sound like that.
Meg reunites with her family and the episode ends. Like the last episode, a lot happens in just 20 minutes. This episode had a festival, a sleepover, a Jerry Springer parody, a real life parody, all while giving time to humanize the characters. Meg is definitely way better here than in the last episode. Even though she's always been the weakest character, hell, they even make fun of that in this episode.
We can't do the show without Meg.
Why not?
Our research shows that Meg is the least popular character on the show.
This episode does a lot for a character, having her be annoyed by her family while deep down still loving them. All the characters feel more fleshed out here. Peter seems like an easy character you can make unlikable, but here he comes off as a well-meaning guy who's just incredibly stupid. He also has the best joke in the episode.
Maybe now I won't give you the antidote
To what?
to the poison you just drank.
See what I mean? This is not normal.
Seth Macfarlane really kills it with his comedic timing. He can make the dumbest shit sound hilarious. The jokes in this one are still fantastic, with punchlines you don't see coming.
I'm out. This kind of acrimony isn't gonna resolve our differences.
Just shut up and throw a chair.
Okay.
This episode also introduces Adam West as a Mayor Quahog, who may be one of my favorite characters yet. Overall, this episode is hilarious and bittersweet, and I'm gonna give it a 10 out of 10. For season 3, I chose episode 4, 1 if by Clam, 2 if by Sea. The episode starts with the guys in the bar finding out that a hurricane is coming to Quahog, so they hide in their houses. Somehow they survive, but the clam has been destroyed. Wait, never mind. But Horace says that he sold the bar to move to Florida. The guys run in for some beer and find out who the new owners are.
Holy crap! It's a gay bar!
The bar was bought by Nigel, a British man who seems to have an infatuation with Peter's wife. The guys try every way possible to get rid of the British, even dumping their beer in the river, which they end up drinking instead. The next morning, Peter comes back with a huge hangover and said on the news that the clam has been destroyed in a fire last night and they already have a suspect.
You know there's a fat drunk guy in there.
Hold it! Freeze!
There he is.
Peter and the guys are arrested, and in jail Joe recognizes a criminal he busted before. The criminal threatens to kill them at midnight, so they try to escape as fast as possible. Meanwhile, their wives find out that Nigel took out an insurance policy for the bar before it was burnt down.
Doesn't that strike you as a little suspicious?
No, not really. In fact, it seems to happen all the time.
The B-plot of the episode is about Stewie meeting Nigel's daughter and being disgusted by her way of talking. Stewie's invited to her birthday party, so he makes a bet with Brian to teach her the proper way to speak English before the day arrives. And after a few days, she learns how to speak an American accent until she messes up at the party. Also at the party, the wives make a plan where Louis seduces Nigel into confessing that he burned down the bar. He confesses, but it turns out that what Lois thought was Bonnie and Loretta eavesdropping in the room was a Globe celebrity. Luckily, the insurance guy was hiding in the closet and heard everything Nigel said. The guys are released from jail, the clam is brought back by Horace, and everyone lives happily ever after. This episode is just as funny as the other two. Once again, a lot of stuff happens, starting with a hurricane, a war of the British, and the guys going to jail. I also think this is the first episode to have a B-plot with Nigel and Stewie's daughter, which was good, but I do think dragged the pacing a little bit. It does kind of tie into the plot, but the problem of having B-plots is that if it's not as funny or interesting as the main plot line, it'll be frustrating whenever it cuts back to it. For that, I wouldn't say this is as good as the first two episodes, but still hilarious. The episode gives a huge spotlight to many of the side characters, especially Quagmire, who's slowly becoming my favorite character.
There's no more girly magazines in the can. All they got is this David Copperfield.
Wait. Any pictures of his girlfriend?
No pictures at all.
The funniest part of this episode is the British. Every time they talk in those dumbass accents, I crack up.
He endeavors to score by dashing between the creases, provided the wicketkeeper hasn't whipped his bails off, of course.
Anybody get that?
The cutaway gags keep getting better every season, and once again the comedy is on point.
Yeah, right. That's what they said about Benjamin Disraeli. You don't even know who I am.
Even though it isn't quite as well paced as the other ones, I'll still give it a 9 out of 10. For season 4, I chose episode 14, The Courtship of Stewie's Father. Before I get into the plot, it is worth mentioning that a lot of stuff happened between season 3 and season 4. The show was cancelled after season 3 due to underwhelming ratings, reruns on Cartoon Network and DVD seals gave the show new life, so Fox picked it up again and premiered season 4 in 2005, 3 years after the last one. Because of that, it's fair to say that a lot of the writers in the previous seasons didn't come back for this one, and you can definitely tell. The episode starts with Stewie trying to kill Lois again and again, and Lois starts to get worried something's wrong.
Notice anything unusual?
I sure do. His father's not in any of them.
The B-plot of the episode has Peter being disappointed that he never gets Employee of the Month. Apparently Peter doesn't work at the toy factory anymore, which is kinda sad because I really like that place, but the guys tell him that he should try to suck up to his boss, so Peter tries to give her a surprise.
Well, I asked around the office and everybody said you liked animals, so I organized a surprise cockfight. Ta-da! Oh boy.
The C-plot of the episode, and yes, there's now 3 plot lines, has Chris breaking Herbert's window, so he spends the episode doing stuff for Herbert to make it up. Oh, and Herbert may be a pervert.
I could use a strapping young man to do some chores around my house.
Lois tells Peter that he's too preoccupied with work and needs to spend more time with Stewie. He tries many ways to bond with Stewie, like taking him to a bar and a baseball game, and leaving him in the car.
Is that a baby in there?
Oh my god! He's gonna miss the game!
He eventually finds out that hurting Lois makes Stewie laugh, so he starts playing pranks on Lois, like throwing her in the trunk of a car and pushing that car into a lake. She doesn't like it though and calls it off, so he finds one more way he can bond with Stewie.
Oh, Disney World! Disney World! Disney World! I want to go to Disney World! Oh, Disney World! Disney World!
While there, Stewie gets kidnapped by Disney and is forced to sing It's a Small World. I mean, It's a Tiny World.
Shh! You wanna get sued?
Peter spots him, frees all the kidnapped kids, and Peter and Stewie walk off into the sunset. This episode felt different from the other seasons for a number of reasons. Now there's 3 different plotlines in the episode, and I feel like it could have just made about Stewie and Peter bonding and would have been a lot funnier. The plot of these episodes just keep getting more complicated and starting to lose its quick pacing. Also, Brian feels like a completely different character in this episode. While he's usually the straight guy to Peter's schemes with a dry sense of humor, in this episode he sometimes acts just as crazy as Peter.
It's peanut butter jelly time! Peanut butter Jello jelly time!
And then he turns normal again.
Well, that depends. Do you really want my advice, or are you just asking random questions again? What's a hypotenuse?
I hope the writers fix this because in this episode, he was just really inconsistent. With that being said, this episode is still really funny and has a lot more dark humor that made me laugh.
Wow! It looks like Michael Jackson's coming right at me!
Quagmire is in this episode for like 2 minutes and he still has the funniest scene.
Well, last night I got...
Wait, Quagmire, let me cover Stewie's ears.
The whole section where they're at Disney World is hilarious, but I'm starting to feel the quality drop just a little bit, so I'm gonna give it an 8.5 out of 10. For season 5, I chose episode 10, Peter's Two Dads. The episode starts with Peter and Lois finding out that Meg's birthday is coming in a week, so they try to figure out how old Meg is without asking her. Meg figures out that they have no idea how old she is, which gets her mad. They try their best to throw a good birthday party, but Meg says it sucks because apparently Meg is ungrateful this episode. Peter tries to be a birthday clown and after a lot of drinking, rides a unicycle down the stairs where he falls off and smashes his father. On his deathbed, his father tells him some inspiring last words.
You're a fat, stinking drunk.
After his dad's death, Peter makes a promise to never drink again and quickly replaces it with something much worse. Brian tells him to meet a hypnotherapist, and while there he recalls his father telling him he's not his biological father. His mother confirms this and tells him that his real father lives in Ireland. Peter and Brian decide to travel there to meet him, only to find out that his father is a town drunk. His father doesn't believe that Peter is his son because he isn't drunk enough like him. Peter thinks about giving up and going home, but then he remembers some inspiring words from his father.
You're a fat, stinking drunk.
Yes, from what he's told us, that's right on the money.
Peter challenges Irish Peter to a drinking competition, which he wins, convincing Irish Peter that he's his real son. Brian tells him that even though he found his real father, he should still remember the guy who raised him, and the episode ends with a pretty catchy musical number. The B-plot of the episode has Stewie getting spanked by Lois for the first time and enjoying it. And then he keeps trying to get Lois to spank him again. Well, in case you're uncomfortable, don't worry because this never comes up again. It just ends with no resolution. I don't know whether to be happy or sad about that, but either way this episode is decent. The entire second half of Ireland was easily the best part, having some of the best jokes in the episode. It may also help that Ireland is my favorite country next to America, but whenever Family Guy goes to a new location like Disney World, it ends up being the most creative part of the episode. Meg definitely seems angrier from the first few seasons, but it's hard to blame her when Peter and Lois are terrible parents. One thing I will give credit to the show for is his portrayal of Peter. He's comedically a bad parent and a bad husband, but he's still able to be likable because he really does care for his family. He's just incredibly stupid and doesn't know how to take care of them. This makes for a character who can be more over the top than Homer Simpson while still having the same amount of heart. In this episode, he forgets about Meg's birthday, but still tries his best at her party, even stuffing a bunch of scarves in his throat. The episode relies a lot on gross out humor compared to the previous ones, also has some jokes that go way longer than they should. It's a shame because I used to love this show for its quick comedic timing, even still making jokes into the credits. But now it feels like they're just trying to pad out the runtime. For example, the B-plot with Stewie. What the hell was that? I get that the joke is that he's a baby who acts way older than he should, but when you start making him horny, it starts to become more uncomfortable than funny. I mean, I think the writers sometimes forget that he's still a baby, but despite his flaws, it's still funny 25% of the time, which is more than I can say for modern Simpsons, so I'll remain optimistic. Who knows, maybe he gets better. Either way, I'm gonna give this a 7 out of 10. For season 6, I chose episode 8, McStroke. The episode starts with Peter growing a mustache and enjoying all the perks that come with having one, like wearing a jean jacket, speaking Italian, and joining a secret mustache club.
Is this the Quahog Mustache Society?
Yes, it is. What's the secret password?
Mustache.
He walks by a restaurant on fire, and the firemen recruit him because he also has a mustache. He saves a man from a burning building, but his mustache catches on fire and burns off, which makes him depressed. As it turns out, the man Peter saved is the manager of the restaurant, and as a thank you, he gives Peter an all-you-can-eat buffet. While there, he eats 30 burgers and has a stroke, leaving his entire left body paralyzed.
Peter, sweetheart, how do you feel?
Had better days, Lois. Had better days.
Peter spends the next 3 months trying to live a normal life and even tries to drive a car, which goes just as well as you'd expect. Luckily, he finds a stem cell research lab and immediately heals. Now that he's fully healed, he tries to sue the fast food company, but loses pretty much immediately. So he tries to get evidence against them by sneaking into their slaughterhouse and finding out that they're mistreating their cows. So they help one of the cows escape, he testifies against them, and the company goes bankrupt. The B-plot of the episode has Stewie waging a bet with Brian that he can become the most popular kid in school school in 2 weeks. He sneaks in disguised as a teenager and immediately becomes popular, even setting a date with one of the girls.
Please don't let this go where I think it's going.
He shows the girls ding dong, and she immediately makes fun of it for being really small. Not gonna lie, every B-plot with Stewie is kinda weird. She tells everyone about it, making him unpopular, so he gets his revenge by kissing her and then taking off his disguise.
This girl is making out with a baby! A nude baby!
But yeah, despite some uncomfortable scenes with the baby, I really like this episode. As someone who's trying to grow a mustache myself, I found all the mustache jokes really funny, especially the Mustache Club where all the characters just say the word mustache whenever they can.
Oh, I think we just send a nice card. Just make sure it has a mustache on it.
Point of mustache.
The chair recognizes your mustache.
Even though the jokes here are hit or miss, with a lot more relying on shock humor, when they hit hard. The Shawshank Redemption reference with the Monopoly Man was pretty funny, and the way Peter talked when paralyzed is comedy gold. There's also some good visual comedy in here as well, like when Stewie thinks of himself as an old man and he looks like a baby with white hair. Even though I don't like everything they're doing with Stewie in this show, that one was pretty good. With that being said, I'm definitely noticing a lot of changes in the show, with the biggest one being Chris. I don't know if it's because Seth Green had a voice change or something, but he sounds completely different and not in a good way. Here's his voice in season 1.
When the kids in school see us on TV, they'll think you're a total psycho.
And here's his voice in season 6.
Magazines. Grape Soda Today. Orange Soda Quarterly. The Fruit Punch Reader.
It just sounded lazier and less energetic, almost like a sleep-deprived stoner. I also noticed the animation getting less energetic too, with a lot of the characters looking bored most of the time. But that being said, I still laughed a few times and the pacing was really good. Like the first 3 seasons, a lot happens in this episode, starting with Peter getting a mustache, losing it, getting a stroke, and finally trying to bring down a fast food company. For that, I think this is an improvement over the last episode, so I'll give it an 8 out of 10. For season 7, I chose episode 15, 3 Kings. This episode has 3 segments parodying different Stephen King stories. It's kinda like Treehouse of Horror from The Simpsons, but fully Stephen King. And as a huge Stephen King fan, of course I think that's awesome. The segments consist of Stand By Me, Misery, and The Shawshank Redemption, but in case you haven't seen those movies, I'll break down the plot of the episodes anyways. It starts with a young Peter, Quagmire, and Joe hanging out in the treehouse when young Cleveland comes in and asks if they want to see a dead body. They set off to find it and try to pass through Old Man Junction's junkyard, but gets caught and chased by Brian. Then they decide to cross the bridge, but then they all get to the end except for Joe, who gets his leg crushed by the train. They then find the body, which of course is Meg, and the bullies find them.
Ace and his whole gang. Beastman, Merman, and for some reason Norm from Cheers.
Peter shoots a gun to scare them off, and they all go home. The next segment starts with Brian as a famous author who is driving through a hurricane. He crashes into Stephen King, causing his car to flip off the road. Stewie finds him and takes him to his house, where we find out that he's a big fan of his books. Brian lets him read his new book before it's published, and Stewie gets mad that his favorite character dies, so he forces him to rewrite it. He asks Stewie to get more paper from town, and uses the opportunity to try to escape. Joe finds him in the house, but before he can save him, Stewie shoots him in the legs. He finally finishes the book and the segment abruptly ends. The last segment has Peter going to prison and meeting the warden. Peter and Cleveland grow a friendship, and Cleveland helps by giving him a rock cutter to make Star Wars figurines. The warden shows how corrupt he is by breaking Joe's legs, and Peter gives the warden his figurines for him to sell for money. One day during inspection, Peter disappears, and as it turns out, he picked a hole through the wall and escaped prison. Cleveland gets parole and the segment ends. I really like this episode. Even though I still don't like the direction the animation is going, the writing was really strong here. Family Guy seems to be at its best when it's going to different settings or parodies something, and the same is true here. I love how with every segment Joe gets his legs crippled. It kinda reminds me of the Treehouse of Horror episode where Willie gets knocked out every segment.
Show me what you got. Is that the best you can do? I can get you home, but you have to do exactly as I do. I'm coming to rescue the lot of you. Ow! Ugh, I'm bad at this.
It also doesn't have as many cutaway gags as usual, but what they do is pretty funny.
Glad I could do my part. I think you may have done too much.
I love how for Stand By Me, they really play into the time period of the 50s and make use of it for some funny jokes.
Man, this trip is dangerous. Couldn't we have just taken a bus?
A black guy.
The funniest scene has to be Shawshank Redemption, where Carter takes everything Peter says seriously.
My God, how can you be so obtuse?
What did you call me?
Obtuse. You're being obtuse.
2 months in the hole. Or am I being obtuse?
Nope, now you're being acute.
I also love the fourth wall jokes with the voice actors.
Who the hell is Dufresne? I don't know, sir. Hey, we have almost the same voice. Excuse me, I'm the prison doctor. I'm here for Andy's checkup. Andy Dufresne?
Overall, I had a blast with this episode, so I'll give it a 9 out of 10. For Season 8, I chose Episode 9, Business Guy. The episode has Peter finding out that Carter, his stepdad, has never had a bachelor party, so he takes him to a bar to get a lap dance, which results in Carter getting a heart attack. He goes into a coma, and his lawyer tells the Griffins that in his will, he gave the company to them. Lois denies the offer, but Peter takes the opportunity to become the CEO. He immediately fires everyone on the board, which gets Lois mad. He replaces the board with his friends and creates new ideas like the African American heart monitor.
Yeah, he's aight.
Carter wakes up from his coma and gets mad when he finds out what Peter did to his company. Peter kicks him out of the company, leaving him broke, and Lois explains that Peter's starting to get over his head. Peter hires Carter as a janitor and does everything in his power to make a mockery of him. Carter and Lois try to get Peter out of the company by using his one weakness:
swamp monsters.
Swamp monsters, of course!
The idea works. Peter gives the company back to Carter, and Peter gets to keep his plane.
Peter, how are you doing that?
I don't know, Lois. I'm scared.
Well, calm down.
I can't. I get help. Call somebody.
This episode was the worst one yet. Most of the jokes didn't land for me, and Peter is kind of a jerk in this episode. I honestly felt really bad for Carter, even though he's supposed to be the Family Guy version of Mr. Burns. There's some cutaway gags that make no sense, and the shock humor just gets repetitive after a while. With that being said, there's still some clever jokes that made me laugh, like at the beginning of the episode where Peter starts late.
Oh, it sure was nice of you to invite us out on your yacht, Mr. Pewterschmidt.
And while the cutaway gags are sometimes kind of lazy, this one was pretty good.
There once was a boy who liked to suck his thumbs. His mother asked him to stop, but he wouldn't. So she cut off his thumbs. Now he has no thumbs. Good night.
There's still some good laughs to be had, and I like that there isn't a B-plot in this episode, but the jokes are still starting to become less creative and more lazy, so I'll give it a 6.5 out of 10. For Season 9, I chose Episode 11, German Guy. The episode has Peter trying to find Chris a new hobby, which leads to him finding a puppet store owned by Franz Gutentag. They become friends, making Herbert mad, and he goes to the Griffins to tell him that Franz is actually a Nazi who used to torture him in a concentration camp. They don't believe him, and Peter goes to his house to invite him to dinner. While there, Chris asks to use the restroom. He goes into the wrong room and finds a bunch of Nazi propaganda, so Franz takes him and Peter into the basement at gunpoint. Peter spanks the gun off his hand and Chris grabs it, leading to one of my favorite jokes in the series so far.
Quick, shoot him, Chris! What are you waiting for?
How do I know which one to shoot?
What?
How do I know which one is the real dad?
We never switched. Wait, we don't even look the same.
Chris shoots Peter and Franz gets the upper hand. Later, they find a window in the basement and yell to Herbert for help. Herbert gets in his army uniform and he fights a Nazi in the most epic battle in the show's history. I love how they keep playing the epic music even when they're taking their pills. Herbert throws him off the porch, killing Franz, and they all live happily ever after. I actually really dug this episode. Even the new animation style is starting to grow on me. I'm kinda bummed that they changed the aspect ratio to widescreen, but I quickly got used to it. Chris's voice is back to normal, and Peter is once again more likable, even if he's bullying Meg a lot more than usual.
Hey, Meg! Hanging out with all your friends?
There's also some nice visual gags too, like the sports glove in the Nazi room. Overall, I had a lot of fun with this episode, so I'll give it an 8.5 out of 10. For Season 10, I chose Episode 23, International Affairs. Before starting, I do want to mention that Season 9 was the last episode with Seth Macfarlane as a writer, and from now on, he's only a voice actor, as he went to work on movies and other shows. So whether the next episodes are good or bad, don't blame Seth MacFarlane because he didn't write them. The episode starts with Joe busting a drug operation at a motel, finding buttloads of drugs.
There were 100 kilos of cocaine right here in Quahog, and yet my guy can't get dick.
He becomes famous and invites Peter and Quagmire to a cop party celebrating his achievement. Peter crashes into someone's car, which leads to a chicken fight. Thank God, man. I was starting to get worried I would go through this entire challenge without seeing one of these, and yes, it's fantastic. They crash into a bus, go through the 1800s, go back to the future on the DeLorean, clone themselves, go to space, and all of it was so well choreographed. They should have one of these for every season, it's that good. So anyways, back to the episode. Joe invites Bonnie to a party, but she declines. He meets a female cop there who kisses him, which freaks him out. He tells Peter and Quagmire about this, and for some some reason Cleveland isn't there. Did they kill him off, or oh, okay, I see. Peter and Quagmire tell Joe that he should cheat on Bonnie since Bonnie cheated on Joe in Paris, so he does it at work. During his son's birthday party, he tells the guys that he didn't feel good about it, but Bonnie hears him over the baby monitor. They argue in front of everyone, and apparently Bonnie didn't cheat on Joe, but only thought about cheating on him.
Damn it, Peter! Now hold on. In my defense, it is my experience that I am generally correct about most things.
They file for divorce, and Peter, feeling like he's responsible, arranges for Joe and Bonnie to go to the place they met. He plays Africa from Toto, which makes him fall in love again, and the episode ends. So obviously the best part of this episode was a chicken fight, which gives this episode at least 3 points. Apparently Joe has a baby now, and Bonnie is surprisingly pretty distant from him. It's a sad change from her character from being a loving wife in the earlier seasons, and she comes off very unlikable here. Quagmire seems a lot less energetic here, and Meg continues to have very few lines in these episodes. The episode does kind of seem rushed in the second half. You think once Joe and Bonnie get divorced, we see what their son is going through, or what single life is like for Joe, kinda like that Simpsons episode, but skips through all that and they quickly come back together. It's an okay episode with some good jokes, but the chicken fight was pretty awesome, so I'll give it a 6.5 out of 10. For season 11, I chose episode 1, Into Fat Air. The episode starts with Lois getting invited to dinner by her ex, who Peter is jealous of. While there, he and his family talk down to them and tell them that they're climbing Mount Everest. Peter takes them up to the challenge and says he'll beat them to the top before them. They fly to Yemen and meet them there, starting the race. They finally get to the top, but the Fishmans already got there an hour earlier.
And quite frankly, we're bored of it up here. So you guys enjoy it.
But a storm comes to the mountain, and they get hungry and lightheaded on the way down. They find the dead body of Fishman's son and decide their best option is to eat him so they don't starve. They find the other fishermen looking for their son and don't tell them that they ate him. They get to the bottom, but Lois feels guilty and decides they have to go back to save them from the storm. They find them passed out in the cliff, so they bring Peter down with a rope and save them both. The Fishmans are saved and they end their feud.
You rest up, get better, we ate your son. Bring it up!
The episode was okay. I didn't laugh at a lot of the jokes, and for the first episode of the season, it feels pretty lazy. There are some jokes I like when Peter picks his donkey.
I don't know what it is, but you have got it.
I also love the montage of Stewie in Las Vegas, but instead of winning, he quickly goes broke and becomes a drunk. Finally, there's a scene of the family pulling Peter up with a rope, and Peter's holding a rock.
I found a rock I like.
And yeah, that's pretty much it. Other than that, most of the jokes were either just amusing or straight up confusing.
Brian, I'm not sure I can do this. It's chillier out here than Angelina Jolie. Something like that. I don't know, I'm so cold. She took that sad old lady's husband.
What the hell are you talking about? Who are you talking to?
This is the first episode so far that I'll consider bad, but since there's still some clever jokes, I'll give it a 5.5 out of 10. For season 12, I chose episode 11, Brian's a Bad Father. The episode starts with Peter and the guys going hunting, and I guess the Cleveland show hasn't been cancelled yet because Cleveland isn't there. Peter shoots Quagmire like an idiot, which leaves Quagmire injured. Quagmire is mad and asks for his CDs back, but Peter wants to keep them, making Quagmire declare they are not friends anymore. Peter and Quagmire sit at different places in the Drunken Clam, and both try to get Joe to sit with them.
Joe, I got a deck of cards you can put in your wheels to look cool.
Joe, I'll do the wavy stomach for you.
Looks like a real wave.
Joe gets tired of it and decides to pick Quagmire over Peter since he's Susie's godfather. Peter decides the only way to become friends with Quagmire again is to let him shoot him, which Quagmire doesn't hesitate to do. Peter starts to get scared and fights for the gun, so Joe shoots him in the arm to settle this. But Quagmire wants to shoot Peter himself and shoots him in the head. The B-plot has Brian getting a phone call from his son, but chooses to ignore him as a father who's never there is better than a father who's there sometimes and gone other times. Apparently Brian got a son at some point and for some reason doesn't like him. He learns that his son is coming to Quahog on Tuesday and Stewie forces him to go to dinner with him. But even after telling his son he would go, he decides to stay home until he learns on the news that his son is a celebrity.
Did you hear that? Your son's gonna be a TV star.
Brian is kind of unlikable in this episode. He tries to be nice to his son and asks if he could let him be a writer on a show. Oh, and his son is a human. I'm not gonna question that. He gets hired and immediately grows an ego. His writing is pretty terrible, so he's fired, and when he asks his son to help him, he realizes that Brian's only been using him to advance his own career. He steals all the food in the studio and becomes a drunk, so Stewie suggests he apologizes to his son in person. The security guard doesn't let him inside the studio though.
Well, you know what? I'm sorry too.
For what?
For this!
Yeah, you know, you probably would have had a better shot if you hadn't yelled, "For this!"
Stewie gets in by disguising himself as an actor and tells his son how sorry Brian is. They meet at a park, his son forgives him, and the episode ends. My first thought after this episode is that a lot of my favorite characters are pretty unlikable. As I've said, what makes Peter a great character is that he's a genuine guy who loves his family, but he's just so stupid that he does bad things. In this episode though, he shoots Quagmire and doesn't even say sorry. That's not stupidity, that's just straight up being a psychopath. Quagmire literally shoots Peter in the head. Could've just killed his friend right there, but he doesn't care. Even though he's right for being mad, I miss the energetic, womanizing, happy Quagmire from the earlier seasons, and lately he's gotten a lot more cynical. Joe's the only likable guy here, trying to be the middleman. Brian is also a pretty big jerk in this episode. I don't know what these writers were thinking, they probably just hate Brian and want to bring his character down, because there's no way anyone could look at the script and think people are gonna root for Brian. It's sad because he was honestly one of my favorite characters with his dry sense of humor and reasonable thinking, but now he's just a jerk who thinks he's better than everyone else. But to the episode's credit, it is a lot funnier than the last episode. The can of whoop-ass joke was pretty funny.
Lois, why did you buy this?
And despite Peter being pretty unlikable, he has his moments.
Can't even walk and chew gum at the same time.
Peter, come on, walk over here.
I'm doing something.
It can still be funny, but man, I just can't root for these people. 4 out of 10, easily the worst episode yet. For season 13, I chose episode 18, Take My Wife. The episode starts with the guys playing poker, and Cleveland is back. The wives come in telling them they bought a trip to the Bahamas, but Quagmire can't come because it's only for couples. Quagmire gets a girlfriend from an internet ad though, so they all go to the hotel and shenanigans ensue. But as it turns out, it's actually a couples retreat that the wives tricked them into going to. They go through some exercises and find out that they correspond better as different couples.
No, that's not a good thing.
Peter gets paired with Quagmire's girlfriend and Lois is paired up with Cleveland, but Lois starts to get jealous and calls it off. Before they can go back home though, their counselor gets shot and the workers start a revolution. They all escape, are quickly captured, and profess their love for each other before they're killed. As it turns out though, it was all part of the counseling, and they go home closer than ever. The B-plot is Carter looking over the kids when Peter and Lois are away. He takes away everyone's screens and tries to get them to play old games and sit outside. They bond over knocking on doors and throwing flour on their neighbors, and they have fun living screen-free. When Peter and Lois come back, they turn on the TV and they immediately turn back to normal. I really like this episode. After the last episode made everyone into a jerk, this felt like a return to form. Even though the wives lie to their husbands to get them there, they do feel sorry at the end. There's a few good jokes here, my favorite being when Peter accidentally starts a 1,000-year war between the Wasps and the Owls, but before we can see them fight...
Sorry, I'm being told this would be very expensive to animate, so instead here's some stock footage of an old plane trying to take off.
That was pretty good. There's also the scene where Peter shoots a flare to get a plane's attention, but ends up destroying it instead.
You gotta help us!
It was fairly entertaining with a few twists as well, and Quagmire seems back to his old self too, so I'll give it an 8 out of 10. For season 14, I chose episode 4, Paranormal Activity. I'm a sucker for Halloween episodes, and this one was pretty nice. The episode starts with the guys watching Mad Pup 2, which they think is so bad they decide to write something better. They try to find ideas for horror movies, but all their ideas suck, so they go to an abandoned asylum for inspiration. They come up with ideas like an evil bar soap, a murderous cat, and a parody of The Walking Dead that consists of Cleveland fixing a light bulb. They start to get scared and try to leave, but someone locks the doors. They finally break out, but not before encountering the man who locked them in, so they decide to fight back and beat him up. As it turns out, he was just a janitor at the place and he dies. Finding out they killed an innocent man, they bury the body in his car.
Oh crap, it's still alive!
They all try to keep it a secret, but Peter is on edge.
Oh my god, Peter, come look at the newspaper. Janitor dead.
What? No!
Right here, my college roommate, Jan Itta.
They all try to frame each other at the crime scene. They have a Mexican standoff, but Peter has an idea.
Don't you see? This is a horror movie!
The movie sucks though, and as it turns out, the janitor was actually a KKK member disguised as a war hero. The B-plot is Brian buying a pair of glasses even though he doesn't need them. Stewie tells him he's only wearing them to look smarter than he actually is, and he starts using them to talk to women. Stewie tries many elaborate ways to destroy them until he just hits him in the face with a baseball bat. I know this is supposed to be a joke, but Stewie comes off as a psychopath here. It's not really that funny. But that said, it's a decent episode that has some witty jokes.
I knew you'd find out!
Find out what? I just got David Sedaris' new book, You and the Guys Killed and Buried a Man.
Okay, I am really on edge, and this thing we're doing, I'm not happy about it, and that's a very odd title for a humorous book.
My favorite part was a Mad Pope 2, which is basically just a pope that kills people in stupid ways.
May the sword be with you.
Maybe there'll be a day when I stop laughing at stupid but considering that I'm doing a Family Guy marathon, that's probably not today. I already talked about Stewie being a jerk, but Brian is also back to his egotistical self this episode. I just don't get it. What's funny about Brian being a jerk? That whole subplot with the glasses is easily my least favorite part of the episode, but I still like the rest of it, so I'll give it a 7.5 out of 10. For season 15, I chose episode 18, The Peter Principle. The episode has Principal Herbert getting distraught over his troubling marriage. Due to complaints, he goes on a mandatory leave, and the board asks for a parent to become the new principal. Peter decides to step in, which embarrasses Meg, but when he finds out that Meg is being bullied, he decides to step in for his daughter. Meg starts opening up to the perks of having her dad as a principal, and starts making a list for him to punish. Lois rats him out, and Principal Herbert is reinstated. Peter thinks he did a bad job, but Meg says that he wasn't just a good principal, but a great dad, making this the first episode in a while to end it on a good note. The B-plot is Stewie and Brian opening Airbnb, which quickly gets used by prostitutes. Stewie decides to cash in on it by paying them to hang around and business goes booming. But they decide to take over the Airbnb and take the money for themselves, so Stewie calls the police to raid them in revenge. So this episode was in all honesty really terrible. I don't think I laughed once in this episode. Everything just felt stale and lazy, and the witty comedic timing of the previous seasons now feel completely gone. Even the way they present the jokes feel completely different now.
She's always trying to make me be social. Cocktail parties, school functions, that time we planted trees in Jerusalem. What? Look, all I'm saying is put an Israeli guy next to an Arab guy, and I can't tell a difference. Absolutely. I'm as creative as the first spider to spin a web.
Hey, you know how we always dreamed about having a house that comes out of our butts?
There's a part of this episode that is just Joe and Bonnie talking about Phil Collins with no animation on screen, and goes for a whole minute. At this point, it's become the norm for these episodes to have characters bleeding in some way or some type of shock humor, and there's only so long you can do this before it starts getting repetitive. The only mildly funny joke was the hockey cop cutaway, where Peter plays a cop who says a lot of hockey puns.
Get the puck out of my neighborhood!
To be fair though, I do like how Peter is portrayed here. We once again see Peter who genuinely loves his daughter, and him standing up for Meg was pretty sweet. But at the end of the day, I just found this episode boring. Jokes go for way too long, they're not clever anymore, they're not subversive anymore, and you see the punchline coming from a mile away. I've been pretty fair and open with a lot of these episodes, but now I'm starting to see why people hate this show. 3 out of 10. For season 16, I chose episode 20, Are You There, God? It's Me, Peter. This episode starts with Peter spending his entire weekend on the couch watching TV. Kinda like me when making this video. He spends so much time on it, his sweaty skin fuses into the couch and he doesn't want to rip it off. He tries to live life normally, but Lois doesn't like it, so the family tries to cut it off when he sleeps. He wakes up, says he doesn't want it gone, and tries to leave but gets stuck in the doorway.
This isn't working. You know what? Just give me a push.
Chris pushed him out, causing Peter to crash down the stairs and die. Peter finds himself in an elevator where he meets God, and I shit you not, he spends 4 minutes talking with God. 4 minutes. The questions aren't even that funny, they just lay on the floor and talk about Tom Brady and Taylor Swift.
Will Taylor Swift and Katy Perry ever reconcile their differences? Alright, can you name every SNL actor alphabetically? Can I ask you my Tom Brady questions? Oh my god, who the hell cares?
Finally, Peter finds out that he's dead, but makes a deal with God that if he can prove his family's life would be better with him alive, he'll get a second chance. He tries everything like adopting a feral cat to having a nice family dinner, which falls apart when Chris gets a plain burger. Peter drives home trying to love them, but finally bursts out.
I hate you all so much!
He then starts seeing God everywhere, and before his family goes inside the house, he confesses how much he loves them one by one, knowing it'll probably be the last time he sees them. He goes back inside the car and tells God that he should kill him already.
My family would be better off without me. I'm a terrible husband and a terrible father.
But God lets him live, and he spends the end of the episode appreciating his family. Even though I criticize this episode for having overly long and unfunny jokes, the episode is surprisingly emotional. I've always said that what makes Peter a good character is the fact that he really loves his family, but is just too stupid to express it correctly, and therefore does terrible things. The show has strayed away from this, as given us a Peter who's a straight up psychopath who hates his family. But here we kinda get the old version of Peter back. The scene where he cries and says his family's better off with without him and that he's a terrible father and husband was honestly really sad. This episode could have been the series finale as we see Peter come to terms with his bad behavior and at the end seem to be on a better path. But outside of the last 3 minutes of this episode, there's nothing to write home about. There was only one good joke in the episode, and that was this.
I just wish we were doing songs that weren't so hard to sing as a group.
That definitely feels like a joke from the earlier seasons, but that whole thing with the couch being fused into Peter's back was more gross than funny. It's a really mediocre episode with a bittersweet ending, so I'll give it a 5 out of 10. For season 17, I chose episode 16, You Can't Handle the Booth. The episode doesn't start with the intro, but instead the Griffins going to a phone booth and then the intro plays on the TV. The entire episode has the Griffins doing commentary on the episode they're watching, and that's about it. I would go over a plot of the episode they're commenting over, but since most of the episode sounds like this...
You know, I actually had a couple of ad-libs about Chinese working conditions.
All you said was children make iPhones.
I honestly couldn't tell. It's also confusing to understand when it keeps cutting back and forth between the episode and the commentary, so I'll give it 2.5 out of 10, a really boring episode. For season 18, I chose episode 13, Rich Old Stewie. The episode starts with Stewie in the future as an old rich man who's receiving a Lifetime Achievement Award. Brian has come to see him after 50 years of not talking to Stewie to tell him that Peter is on his deathbed. They both go on a road trip to see Peter and pick up Chris and Meg on their way there, who live some pretty questionable lives. They see that the neighborhood has become worn down and Peter can't leave his bed. Peter asks for Stewie to take care of the family after he dies and he agrees. The house is repaired, Peter's bed is updated, and he sadly dies. Stewie leaves to take money from the bank, but the rest of the family start laughing, and Peter wakes up because, as it turns out, this was all a scam to get money from Stewie. But second plot twist, Stewie knew it was a scam from the beginning and blows up the house. But there's a third plot twist, as Stewie was just imagining all this and we're still in present day. I really like this episode. I usually complain about the family being unlikable, but since this was all a daydream, I'm pretty okay with that. I honestly wasn't expecting any of the twists, and there's also some very clever jokes.
I'm Lane Bergen, the biggest star of May 2020 and on. So if you've only watched TV up until April of 2020, my name would be unfamiliar to you.
The best joke was easily when it's revealed that in the future you can turn on closed captions in real life, but they're 30 seconds late. Add in a good Godfather parody and the fact that the episode is pretty entertaining, I think this is the best episode in a while. I'll give it 8.5 out of 10. For season 19, I chose episode 3, Boys and Squirrels. The episode starts with Peter buying a chainsaw at a yard sale. He uses it to cut bread and make wood portraits of Willem Dafoe, but refuses to turn it off as it was too hard to turn on. He starts cutting a hole into the tree, which causes it to fall down, injuring Peter's arm and the squirrel. Chris and Stewie decide to look after the squirrel and start to become really attached to it until Brian kills it. Stewie and Chris are both devastated and both blame each other for the squirrel's death, but later become friends again. Peter goes to the doctor and Dr. Hartman tries to give him physical therapy, which stretches his neck. As it turns out, this is his real height, and years of bad posture has made him inches shorter. He starts enjoying the perks of being tall, but when he starts kicking people on rides, he wants to become his original height again. Lois helps him by using her power of berating Peter to make him smaller. It works and he becomes a midget, and the episode ends. This episode was just okay. It passed the time, it wasn't boring, but also not that funny. Some of the conversations between the guys are amusing, but that's about it. There's this one cutaway gag where Peter's trying to pull plastic wrap out of a bag, and it takes 90 seconds. 90 seconds. Cutaway gags used to be 15 seconds tops, but now they feel like they're just there to pad out time. But to his credit, it does have a decent punchline.
Perfect. Can't wait to throw that out in 2 weeks.
There's also once again a lot of shock humor here, and at this point I've become numb to it. It's not funny, it's not gross, it's just lazy. They could have come up with a funnier way to kill off the squirrel. Overall dull episode, I'll give it a 5 out of 10. For season 20, I chose episode 19, First Blood. The episode starts with the Griffins throwing a party and Stewie sliding down one of the water slide things and getting hit by a bump. This causes him to bleed in the pants, which makes him think that he's getting his first period, not knowing how they work. Brian tells him it's impossible, but Stewie doesn't believe him. He looks up his symptoms on Google and starts to believe he's pregnant. He goes to the hospital and gets yelled at by a nurse off screen, finally facing reality. The B-plot has Peter and the guys saying how they're starting to feel old. The mayor tells them to come by his ranch for a few days to clear their mind. Apparently Adam West isn't the mayor anymore, as he sadly died in 2017 and was replaced by Mayor Wild West, played by Sam Elliott, who's a good replacement. They go to the ranch and ride to the wilderness. While camping, they get attacked by a bear. They survive, but the bear takes Peter's cowboy hat, so Peter goes back to fight and take it back. They all fight the bear and win, but as it turns out,
Old Man West? The owner at a ranch?
Peter, this isn't Scooby-Doo.
The mayor gives a bear disguise to help them gain manlyhood, and Peter gets his hat back. I didn't laugh once. There were some witty jokes that were amusing, but nothing more than that. The side plot of Stewie thinking he's pregnant was a little weird, but to his credit, I do like how Brian plays a straight man again. It passes the time, but that's about it. I'm honestly getting tired at this point. I'll give it a 5 out of 10. For season 21, I chose episode 2, Bend or Blockbuster. This episode starts with Lois seeing the Clevelands being outside having fun, which inspires her to have a family fun day. Apparently Cleveland has a new wife and a different set of kids, and I'm sure they explain this in the Cleveland show, but I'm not gonna watch that. Peter decides they should rent a movie from the last blockbuster on Earth, so they go on a cross-country road trip. They finally get there, but as it turns out, Peter has a late fee for Lady Bird.
Oh, no problem. How much is it?
$32,419.
The Blockbuster employees chase them, and they both crash. They chase them into the woods until they get to a cliff, and they jump off. They find a cabin and a radio, but Peter decides to use the VCR to watch a movie instead, and the employees find them. Peter feels bad for messing up the road trip, but they tell him today was the most fun they had in a while. Before the employees can shoot them though, an army of Amazon drones swoop in, knock Blockbuster out, and save the Griffins. They tried to finally watch Sliver at home, but the cords are broken, so they decide to go to the last circus city in the world, and the episode ends. This episode is pretty entertaining. Once again, I didn't find that funny, but it was bittersweet. It was also nice to see Peter mention his dad again after he died all the way back in season 4. It's a good plot, the pacing is fast, and the characters are likable, but once again I didn't laugh, so 7 out of 10. For season 22, I chose episode 10, Cabin Pressure. The episode starts with the Griffins at a company picnic where they win a trip to Maine. Peter decides to invite Joe, Quagmire, and Cleveland's families to the trip. They all sleep in a cabin, and Peter's decided for a trip to a bear show where they train a bear to do tricks. Someone clogs a toilet with a big turd, and everyone tries to hunt down who did it. As it turns out, it was Lois, and she asks Peter to take the blame, and she'll buy him the bear merchandise in return. The next morning, Quagmire says he has a whole schedule of stuff for them to do, and because of it, they miss the bear show. Peter gets mad, tells everyone that Lois took the dump, and yells at everyone for ruining his plan. He accidentally causes a fire, and gets worried that his boss will fire him once he sees his cabin burn down. Everyone else gets mad at him, and leaves him to clean the cabin. He has a week to try to fix it, but his boss calls him to tell him he's coming with more towels. Apparently, he once again has a new boss. I find it funny to think that every 2 years he gets a new job. Everyone else comes back to help Peter, and apologizes for not letting him do what he wanted, and only what they wanted. It's too late though, and Peter takes full responsibility, but as it turns out, Preston didn't like the cabin and only used it for a tax deduction, and now that it's destroyed, he'll get more money. Or something like that. I don't know how taxes work. As it turns out, it was all a dream Peter had after being hit by an egg, and the episode ends.
Poor Darren.
This is the last episode of the challenge. I think it's pretty good. I was going to talk about how unlikable everyone is. Peter very nicely invites his friends to vacation, and they only do stuff they want to do, and Peter says some pretty harsh stuff near the end. But at the end, they all apologize to each other, showing it was intentional this time. I seem to be finding a trend with these modern Family Guy jokes, as 50% of them are just self-aware bits that try to sound relatable.
Come on, Lois. This is our big chance to yell at kids who aren't ours. Now to put on a pair of shorts I never wear at home but packed for vacation, hoping they'd magically fit.
Now be sure to put your bikes down in a place that blocks the path of people just trying to live their lives.
I know you're leading me down a rabbit hole to ISIS beheadings, but this was a bullseye.
I get what they're going for, but when many of the jokes are like this, it just starts to feel kind of lazy and repetitive. But there are a couple good visual gags, like when they show different images of people being chased by a moose, and each one of them gets more and more ridiculous. That's definitely a joke old Family Guy would come up with. Even though I've never seen the show, the Reed and Bob Burgers cameos were also great, and even though I think Quagmire is kind of a jerk in this episode, he has some good ones.
Somebody's gonna have to look out over that girls' volleyball camp next door.
Nice serve, Stacy!
It's entertaining with a couple good laughs, so I'll give it an 8 out of 10. Well, that was truly a journey. I've compiled my research, rewatched the first episode to refresh my mind, and now I like to go over the 14 changes I've noticed throughout the show. Every character looks bored when they're not talking. I think the idea is to show that the characters become less fazed by Peter doing dumb stuff over time. It just looks very off-putting. They talk less naturally. This is due to a lot more meta jokes and fourth wall breaking, and they just talk in a weird way now. Here's Peter talking in season 1.
Hey, look! Hey, I fell in the pool with my clothes on. How hilarious is that? That is so Peter Griffin, huh?
And here he is in season 20.
Yeah, and also enjoy Pandora. It's great music, and all the ads are tailored to me.
Peter, As I said, he goes from an idiot who loves his family to an idiot who seems to hate his family and just be a jerk in general. But this is pretty inconsistent, and sometimes he can be really nice. Gross out humor, a lot more gore and a lot more shock humor. I'm usually fine with dark humor, but it's mostly unnecessary and not that clever. Brian. At first he was a straight man to Peter's schemes, always drinking, reading the paper, and being the most sophisticated guy in the family, which was funny because he was also a dog. But now they've gone into a much more political approach with his character and gave him a pretty big ego. Meg goes from being a realistic teenager to an abused, bullied, hated character. I liked her character as someone who's embarrassed and annoyed by her family while still loving them, and now they've gone into a much more mean-spirited and simple approach with her character. Joe goes from being a determined and stimulated cop who takes his job seriously to a lot more laid back, which honestly isn't a terrible change, but I still like the old Joe better. Quagmire comes from an over-the-top, womanizing, energetic guy to a lot more cynical and serious. Lois comes from a good mother who tries to keep the family together to a terrible mother who's sometimes just as bad as Peter. Stewie goes from an evil, maniacal baby to just a talking baby who uses big words and a funny accent. The animation becomes more stiff and constrained. It used to be that the animation would help elevate the joke, but now it feels like most of this could be shot in live action. The characters just move better in the earlier seasons and the animation had more personality. The jokes go a lot longer. Comedic timing isn't a thing anymore, and sometimes it feels like they're padding out the runtime by stretching out the jokes. It just seems less colorful. I don't know if it's partly because of the darker humor or all the characters looking depressed, but I honestly think the earlier seasons are better to look at. And finally, it feels like the creators are having less fun. A lot of the jokes are lazy, and the animation used to be much more lively and energetic. The characters kind of reflected as they seemed a lot more depressed and less fun. And when the characters are depressed, it makes it hard for me to have fun watching them. To add my research, here's a graph of the ratings for each episode I watched. It's honestly kind of surprising because while there's some bad episodes after season 10, and the highs not being as high as the first 7 seasons, out of the 22 seasons, there are 13 that I gave at least a 7, which I would consider a positive review. This shows that even though I've gone through all the changes of the show and how overall I think the show has declined in quality, when it comes to individual episodes, or at least the ones I chose, the decline isn't that big. For my thoughts on the overall show, even though the show has been going on for over 20 seasons, it hasn't been as prime for a while, I still really respect and love Family Guy. People call it a ripoff of The Simpsons, especially in those earlier years, but that's part of why I love it. I like the idea of a more adult, over-exaggerated version of The Simpsons, and it creates a great alternative to that show. Even though I don't like the direction the show has gone with its characters and its humor, it's not ending anytime soon. People are still watching, and some people still love the show, and I could be completely wrong about the writers having less fun. I don't want this to be one of those videos saying how a show is not as good as it used to be and that it should have ended years ago. I just want to see how the show changed or evolved, and compared to most, Family Guy has changed a lot for better or worse. But change shows that the writers do care, even bad change. At the end of the day, Family Guy is not what it used to be. Hell, it's pretty much a completely different show. If you love the early seasons, you probably won't like the new seasons, and if you love the new seasons, you're probably not a fan of the early ones. Even though I think the show has gotten worse, it really just adapted to a new audience, as there's people still love the new seasons. Do I still think the show's worse now? Yes, but as long as there's still an audience for it, why does it need to end? It's Family Guy, it's just here to give you a good time, and to this day, it still does for a lot of people. If you enjoyed this video, I'm thinking of doing this for shows like The Simpsons and South Park, so subscribe if you're interested. I'll also only do it if this video gets 10,000 views, as this did take a long time to make, and one way you can help with that is by clicking the like button and leaving a comment. But anyways, I've been filming for 2 hours, so I'm gonna go sleep. Good night.